Tenakoto Katsuo. Welcome back to the Youth Factor, where we aim to see the world through the lens of the future. I'm your host, Alex Jung, and I hope to take you on a virtual journey around the world, where stories untold will be shared, current issues will be discussed, and the voices of the youth will be heard. Today, we explore the land of morning calm and the country I call home. This country has the most amazing food. Sure, you may know it's world-class fried chicken, but there are also some iconic ones like kimchi-jjigae, doenjang-jjigae, bibimbap, sundae-guk, tteokbokki. Just naming them makes me hungry. This country can be best characterized as a country who experienced a lot of pain, but redeemed itself. Despite being annexed by Japan in 1910 to 1945 and oppressed under Japanese rule through forced labor and sexual slavery, now known as what we call comfort women, then immediately engaging in a pointless war with separated families and immense casualties, then with military dictatorships one after another creating harm to the civilians, this country has demonstrated immense economic boom from one of the poorest to one of the most wealthy countries in Asia, earning its spot in the G20. Contemporary music, film, and dramas are widely enjoyed worldwide, including the famous BTS, Blackpink, and Squid Game, but also a beautiful language, Hangul, claimed as one of the most intellectually advanced languages in the world. Today, I'm proud to explore South Korea. I'm extremely excited to record this episode as it hits quite close to home. And I'm honored to introduce today's guest host, Stephen Lee, who will be beginning a new chapter of his life attending UWCUSA in August. Welcome, Stephen.
Hello.
Yeah,
It's so nice to be here.
awesome.
I've been listening to your podcast and I think it's so inspirational and it's a good idea.
Thank you so much. I'm very pleased to hear that. So before we begin, could you please introduce yourself a little bit?
Mm, okay, my name is Steven and I'm 18 years old. I'm from Seoul, South Korea, and I've been living here since when I was born.
Mhm.
And I love this city. I love Seoul. I love Korea. I have so much good and bad memories
Mm,
living here. And I have many hobbies, but one of them is traveling around Seoul.
mm,
Even though I'm a native, like Seoul is always changing and there's always something new and flashy around. So when I go to a place that I like normally go, there's something changed. Something changed over a span of months or years. So there's always things to look around. So that's good. And also the public transportation system is so well organized. So
well organized. Yeah.
even if I'm from Seoul, I like to like have a traveler's mindset and look around, observe things. Yeah, that's my recent hobby.
Awesome.
And because I'm living few after a few days,
Mhm.
I started to visit special places to my heart.
Mm.
I'm visiting special places to me, and I'm labeling them on my map app on my phone. So
Mhm.
yeah, I'm even though I love Seoul, I'm more than excited to live for UWC.
Mhm. And I wish you the very best in that journey, and I'm sure you're going to enjoy it. It's going to be very different because you're going to America. It's going to be nothing like South Korea. So it's going to be a very new experience, and I wish you all the best for that. So the first topic we'll be discussing is the challenging education and hyper-competitive society in South Korea. Now, this is one that is known worldwide as a big issue. So he described education as not for the sake of change and growth, rather a competition where self-worth is determined by numbers, grades, and university results. So could you begin by outlining your experiences during high school under the Korean curriculum?
Mm, yeah, I don't know where to begin, but I think many South Korean students who are in high school will be able to relate to my experience. Of course, my experience cannot like represent all high school experiences, but yeah, when I first like encountered this was when I was in middle school,
Mhm.
because in early ages, mm, students in Korea go to like hagwon, which is a cram school,
Yeah.
and they study for like the next education. When they're in middle school, they already like finish high school education in private education systems.
Mhm.
So I was participating in that partly, but at the same time I was not like fully in that side of education because I don't know, my parents are relatively like
Liberal in that case.
liberal. So they let me do whatever I want.
Mm-hmm.
But I did went to some hagwons when I was in middle school. And when I was going to high school, I chose a kind of competitive high school. And the reason behind that was because I as a kid I like to be challenged, because whenever I challenged myself, there was something great, some experience for me. So I decided to go to a competitive school because that could give me a challenge that might lead me to grow and like be a better human being. So I decided to apply for this competitive high school, and I got accepted, luckily, because there were not many people who applied that year. So I got accepted, and that high school was not quite like my expectations.
Right.
It was quite an opposite.
Mm.
So the first day, because my school was far away from my high school, they offered a school bus service, and I knew something was off once I like stepped foot on that school bus,
Mm.
because it was that silent and it was dark, and it's not just the silence, it's the exhaustion that I can feel from senior students who are
Mm.
in that bus. And even though the bus was packed with people, it was like riding a bus alone because no one was speaking, everyone was sleeping or watching their smartphones. I just didn't like that energy that much. And that expanded in my high school experience as well.
Mm.
So when I was in first year, it was very busy. They kept throwing assignments, exams, and I don't know, it was not at the education that I expected,
Mm.
even though it had parts of parts that I liked, the projects and the people I liked, but generally it was kind of competitive, and we took exams on a regular basis. So their test scores just sent to my parents and to me. And that experience is really just sickening.
Mm.
It was just not for me. I don't know about other students, but it
Mm.
was not for me. Yeah.
Yeah, I
And the
completely.
feeling, yeah.
No, keep going.
The
Sorry.
feeling that my self-worth is determined by those number
Mm.
is really sickening.
Mm.
And by sickening, I mean literally sickening. I got sick. One day, uh, in the second semester, I got a text message from an unknown number, and it said I might be of risk of lungs tuberculosis. I don't know how to pronounce it in English, but it's a infective
Mm.
lungs disease which can be crucial.
Yeah.
So I was not recommended, I was told to visit a doctor immediately. And I remember rushing to the hospital with my mom. And I it's all like a dream now. Like it all happened in the flash, and I was in the hospital, isolated hospital, for like 2 weeks.
Mm.
And that was very, like, at first I felt like, why me? Why am I getting this disease that anyone can get infected? Why me? It was kind of an anger.
Mm.
And then it was sadness. I felt just sad after accepting that I'm like I can't do anything outside of this hospital for 2 weeks. It was very sad.
Mm,
And after that sadness, I I started to think about things that I normally didn't. I started to have some awakening moments
mm,
because even though I knew something was off when I was in school, I didn't have a chance to think about it because I was constantly like in the system. I was constantly in the system and I was doing things that I was told to do. So I didn't have any time to
mm.
think about what my purpose was and what I want as an individual. I was just a part of that huge school group.
Right.
And after when I was in hospital, I started to think about a lot of stuffs.
I mean, I'm very sorry you had to go through that, but I also think that what you learn from this, right, and what you kind of gain from it, the kind of awakenings you have to actually reflect upon the current situation of South Korea in your own education. I think I'm very glad that it helps you realize and see the issue from like an outside lens. Because when you're actually going through that education system, you won't realize it. You just think you like you said, you think something's off, you think something's wrong, but you never have the chance to think about it because Korean schools are so fast paced. They're so pressuring, as in there's one homework, there's one assignment, it's one after the other. You don't have time to actually think what is wrong about this education system. And I think that's one of the big problems is that mental well-being is not taken care of at all in South Korea when it comes to education. Because if it really was, the curriculum would not be designed in this way, which is going to lead into my next question, which is about Sunung, which is the kind of infamous Korean test, which is very known for the stresses it puts upon students. So in Hong Kong, there's a curriculum called the DSC that also kind of functions in a similar way, that everything kind of rides on one exam towards the end and it's really high pressure. So can you tell us more about this curriculum and why it's stressful and what issues you think arise from this?
Yeah, the 수능.
Mm,
Yeah, it is very stressful, like the DSC curriculum
mm,
in Hong Kong. Your whole college entrance is determined by one single exam.
mm,
So that's very stressful. And to explain the basic college entrance curriculum in Korea, there is two big categories where you can get to university, which is the first one is 정시, which involves 수능, as you mentioned, a one big test. And the second one is called 수시 and it's based on your high school grades and your teacher's notes on your academic achievements. So the Korean government have been changing the policies ever since the education blow up in Korea.
mm,
But I think the main problem of this issue is not the, of course, 수능 or like other curriculums can be a problem, but the main problem at the core is the competition is too high.
mhm,
However, in my opinion, however you change the policies, if the competition is too high, someone will find a way to benefit. And often that is wealthy people or
mhm.
someone who have access to private educations, tutoring.
That's right.
So I think the core of this issue, to solve this issue, fundamentally, we have to get rid of the competition. Even though that sounds really far and hard and idealistic,
Mm.
I think that is the only way that education can be a field of change or growth.
Mm. Yeah, I don't know if they still do this in Korea, but even when my parents were going to school, they would tell me like there'll be rankings of people based on their school grades just released in front of the school. And you would go to the school and you
Yo,
look at where your ranking is, right? And that just
yeah,
shows
yeah.
how competitive it is. And people like of course, if you're like at the bottom, like people laugh at you, but like if you're in like the top 10, they always think, oh my gosh, I need to move up. I need to move up. And these are people that are supposed to be your friends, they're supposed to be your peers. And actually, there's enough studies to prove that when you study with other people collaboratively, your grades are going to improve. But Korea is very opposite to this. It's about I need to be at the top. It doesn't matter who I need to overcome to get there, but I need to be at the top. And like you said, elitism is a really big factor. I mean, have you watched the K drama Sky Castle? It was released
Oh
like,
yeah.
yeah. In Sky Castle, basically, just for the viewers, it's about like this very elite kind of system that's trying to get their like high school students into like the top universities. And the rich will pay intense amounts of monies for private tutors just to get them into the top three universities. We call them Sky in South Korea, so Seoul, Yonsei, and Korea. So in your opinion, what role does elitism and classism play in the division of South Korean success and failure?
The analytics. Okay, to first, I want to. You said that there were like rankings
Mm,
of students,
mm,
and I want to tell something shocking about my ex-Korean high school.
yep.
And that ranking posted on in public
Mm,
was mostly removed because people, of course, people don't like it that
mm,
way.
they
Many
don't.
people don't like it, but my high school, there's no like rankings in public, but when you go to the principal's office or the teacher's office, there's a ranking, the
Oh,
ranking list, and there's like a picture, and there's a name, and their ranking.
mm,
And when I first heard that, I thought it was just a rumor. I thought it was a lie. And after I got accepted to UWC, I kind of started to get curious about what is wrong about this whole system.
mm,
And I started to talk to teachers about it in a like respectful way. And because I was in my high school newspaper club,
mhm,
I had a chance to interview the principal and the vice principal
mhm,
of my high school. Yeah, and when I got to the office, I saw that ranking list, and I was like really shocked. The the conclusion I got from talking to teachers and students is that I cannot blame anyone for this problem. I cannot blame teachers because the system is just built this way and teachers are just following the curriculum. So I think it's a problem that needs to be solved fundamentally, as I mentioned. Teachers are always willing to help and willing to provide for students, but I think the system is not able to reflect that love and respect we have for everyone. And as you mentioned, most students are helpful, but some students, like I saw someone who doesn't like share their, you know, assignments or share their like study informations to other students just because they don't want other students to get good grades, I guess.
mm,
So it's so sad that teachers and students are becoming this way because of the system. And to talk about elitism, there are lots of talk about jaebol and inequalities in Korea, but as a student, uh, in this way, I think the issues are every issues are related to each other
mm,
because these super rich people who is in big companies, who is governing big companies, uh get on news because they send their child or their kids into prestigious university without taking the proper course the proper effort everyone takes. So, and without that, 수능 looks fair on the outside because it's just the same test for everyone. But when you take that into context, rich people or like people who are financially better can provide their kids with better education.
Yeah.
Or even like better teachers' notes, you know? And there are a lot of news about corrupt education admission process in universities. So I think the elitism thing can be also connected to this education system as well.
Thank you very much for that response. So the next question is a bit more dark, I guess. So among OECD, which is the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, South Korea has the highest suicide rates out of them. And I think that for many Koreans, that's a reality that we're very aware of. Unfortunately, what's even sadder is when we look at these statistics, Korean youth are also among the top and highest suicide rates. So why is this such a critical issue? Or more so, why is there a lack of attention supporting mental well-being when this is the reality?
If you ask me the reason why the suicide rate is so high in Korea, I think in my personal experience, I would answer lack of purpose.
Right.
Because when I was in the first year of my high school, I felt like I don't have my own choice. I'm just following what other people are doing, and I'm just following inside the system. I'm not making my own decisions, but I'm following other people's expectations. And I think most Korean students are doing that exact thing, following other people's expectations to get good grades, get into good universities, and get a good job. And that's a standard expectation imposed on Koreans. And the sad thing is that not everyone can achieve that expectation. There's a limited amounts of opportunities and those seats for that Korean dream, perhaps. So if Koreans have a freedom of choice of their life, if they're in the driver's seat, I think not everyone will be going all in studying. Maybe someone can paint, or someone can, I don't know, start a podcast, or I don't know why everyone is so focused in studying alone that they're not spreading out, but focused in this one small point, and they're just crammed all in. So that's the reason, I think, when your only goal and your only purpose of life is good university, good job, and that equals good life, if that fails, you would feel really really bad, because you would feel like you become a bad human being and you feel like you're a failure. So I think the solution to that would be diversifying the field of education, not only studying. In Korean high schools, teachers say like, you can do that in university, just focus on studying. But I think that's not very right. You can do that in high school. Just do that in high school. So yeah. And also, other thing I want to mention is, I felt like when I was young, I felt like mental health support is for troublemakers. I felt like that because when I was in elementary school or when I was in kindergarten, teachers send people who cause trouble to those like psychiatrists. I don't know. So like normally if you have something, some mental issues, you ask for help, but I don't usually see people doing that. I don't usually see people asking for help. And I think maybe that's because of that kind of taboo in that mental support. Yeah.
Thank you. I like the way that you talk about that a lot of Koreans feel like they lose a sense of purpose because almost everyone is raised in the exact same way and are striving for the exact same goal, but the reality is only a very, very, very small portion achieve that. And so when for the vast majority that doesn't achieve that, they can lose a very big sense of purpose. And I think that's very unfortunate. But this type of competitiveness and stress isn't just the students or just in schools. It actually goes beyond, even after you graduate university, in the business world where Chaebol and Taekyeop, so big companies, take up the majority of Korean wealth. And it's the ultimate goal for post-university individuals to be getting into these big corporate companies. And I also think something to talk about is the hierarchical structure in the Korean business world. So could you maybe explain a little bit about how the Korean business kind of structure, I guess, the hierarchy works and why this creates stress and inequality?
Okay, first of all, as you mentioned in the start of the podcast,
Mhm.
Korea evolved rapidly after the Korean War. In order to do this, the initial Korean government used supported these large corporates with chaebars, with investment from government.
Mm.
and and beginning from then, the relationship between the states and the big companies are they're stick together.
Mhm.
They're not two individual thing, because there are lots of huge companies like Samsung or Hyundai.
Mhm.
uh, the big companies are like dominating the whole business.
Mm.
Like, for example, Samsung not only makes smartphones, but they do lots of things. They I think they do constructions, and they do insurance, and one company does all that things. And I think that is pretty unusual,
Mm.
and that can lead to monopoly and
Mhm.
kill small businesses, small startups. So that connects with high school students or university graduates wanting to go to these ops and get good jobs.
Mm. Yeah. I think that it feels like in Korea, it's hurdle after hurdle, it's obstacle after obstacle. So you get through 3 years of high school, and then you're in university, and you try to get over that university hurdle, and then you're trying to struggle into this kind of business system that is based upon hierarchy. In Korea, I still think there's a very big issue with power dynamics within business. So there's a very clear who's the boss, and there's very clear who's the worker, and there's that very big division there. So competitive business also affects the low birth rate in Korea, which surprisingly, I didn't know this, that South Korea has the lowest birth rate in the entire world. So why is this an issue, and what causes such a low birth rate for those working in companies?
Low birth rate is a big issue in Korea. Yeah. In social studies class, I think that's one of the main issues that students usually present.
Mhm.
And the low birth rate issue is the reason of low birth rate issue is connected to so many things. As you mentioned, inequality, these big corporate groups, and competition. And another big factor is education as well,
Mm.
because the amount of money uh, a family needs to put on their kids is so immense because of the competitiveness nature of the education system in Korea. So that intimidates people, I think, to get kids and raise them in this society, because not only they will have to pay a lot of money, the child will go through these immense competitions. And yeah, if I wouldn't get a child in South Korea, maybe. Yeah.
So could you maybe say why is a low birth rate an issue for the country?
uh it's very simple, because while the expected lifespan is getting very longer, and the old people are very large portion of the Korean population, and if the younger generation is small, they have to pay a lot of taxes, or they have to like look after those older generations. And generally, lack of young people means lack of innovation, lack of new policies, or yeah, because those populations or amount of people directly relates to voting rights.
Yeah, I think that the aging population issue is one that East Asia in general, so South Korea, Hong Kong, etc., are facing. But I think that South Korea, like you said, with those reasons, is the birth rate is decreasing continuously and continuously. And I think another factor is that parents, when they're working in companies, they don't have time to raise the children, I think.
They don't have time.
Korea, they've got that really bad system of yagun, or like overnight working, where you work over hours. So like if that's the situation, it's really, really difficult to raise kids, and try to give them as much care as possible. But yeah, thank you for sharing on that topic. So the next topic is Korean reunification, and I think this is a topic that I'm very passionate about as well to talk about. Before we begin, I actually would like to clarify a really big misconception that I think people outside of Korea and how the media portrays North Korea, etc. This is a misconception to really clarify, and I hope that anyone who listens or learns from this podcast understands that North Korea itself is not a bad country. You can claim the leaders of North Korea and the government are tyrants, and they absolutely are. But the reality is the people there are really helpless, poor, innocent lives that unfortunately happened to be living in North Korea. Korea was not separated by choice, but through external forces from the US and the Soviet Union, and the Korean War was pushed through even though it was unwanted. And the consequences were extreme poverty. Both South Korea and North Korea struggled after the Korean War. The 60s was a horrible period for both countries. North Korea still undergoes extreme poverty. Families that will never be reunited were created as a result of the split. And now there are 26 million North Koreans suffering under a dictatorial regime. So I hope that when we talk about North Korea, there is more empathy and sympathy and a level of respect, because the lives that North Koreans experience is not representative of the lives that the government of North Korea experiences. So I hope that's a good clarification before we begin. So Stephen, I'd like you to begin by explaining how Korea was actually separated into two across the 30th parallel. Maybe giving some context after Gwangbokjeol, or the Korean Liberation Day after Japanese rule, and the Korean War, and how this has created now one of the longest Cold Wars in human history.
The Korean independence was there, and people were celebrating. Like I listened on the internet. I found a radio recording when Korea was getting an independent state, and people were celebrating, and they were like out in street, like with their flags.
Yeah.
But after a short period of time, the Soviet Union and United States decided to split Korea into half.
Yeah.
And govern them, because they thought it was unstable. So they thought it's nice to divide into a 38 parallel to two. And the beginning of everything. The 38th parallel was meant to be temporary. It was meant to be temporary, and after the 38th parallel, the two different parts of Korea was meant to build a united government at first, but because of the domestic and international pressure, because it was the beginning of the Cold War back then, so there was a large pressure and disagreements upon two other parts of Korea. Back then, it was not divided. People can just, yeah. So it was, the war was not there, and the tension we now have was not there. So back then, we could have established a one government, but it failed due to domestic and international pressure that was kind of imposed. And because of that, two separate governments, they just went their own ways. I'm gonna do my own, and we both said we're legit. The other one is fake. We're the real Korean government, and one day we will make this one. And both governments were saying that, and so the two separate governments are established. And years passed by, and the difference between two countries started to get bigger. And the ideological conflict also existed back then. So because of that, the Korean War started by North Korea invading South Korea. And yeah, it was total chaos. And the war created lots of human casualties. Even many ordinary peoples died in that war. And still, the Korean War is a huge wound we have as Koreans.
Absolutely.
North and South Koreans, both. The families are separated, and families and friends were separated, and there are lots of deaths, and it's a huge wound.
I think after World War II, there were two big cases of countries being split up. One was Germany and one was Korea. Germany, after Soviet Union collapses, becomes one nation. Korea, when the Soviet Union collapses, that doesn't happen. And in fact, 3 years after the Soviet Union collapses, Kim Jong-il comes into power in North Korea, and then it's just so the cycle begins again. Reunification is out of the question. It's now, we've got a really well-established dictatorship. North Korea's dictatorship, arguably, is the most successful dictatorship human history has seen. It's 3 generations of dictatorship. And it's not a monarchy. It's not like it's a king system or a queen system. This is an absolute dictatorship that is run from 1945 to right now and going to continue. So now that there's the biggest dictatorship in the world, and South Korea, who's very democratic, it just makes it difficult, more and more difficult. But the next question for me is a little different. It's about North Korea and South Korea always seen as enemies. I think whenever I talk with anyone about it, it's this idea that North Korea and South Korea hate each other. So where do you think this narrative arises? Because the reality is, I think a lot of people might not know this, is that under Japanese imperialism, when Korea was oppressed, when comfort woman was a thing, when Korean language was stripped away, Korean culture was stripped away, North and South Korea, there was no such thing called North and South Korea. It was one Korea. We shared the same pains under Japan. And after being split, now it seems that we're enemies forever. So where do you think this narrative comes from?
Yeah. I want to first mention that narrative is not completely false. There's 3 things that unite a nation. And those 3 things were history, language, and ethnicity. And I think North and South Korea mostly share those 3 things. And those 3 things are what made Korea. Korea is just a small country compared to China or Russia. But it's very interesting that we have a very long history. And I think the reason behind that is those three factors: language, history, and the ethnicity.
Yeah.
We never lose those three things. And now that we're divided, of course, I agree that there's lots of differences between North and South Korea.
Absolutely.
But when you look at it in a different light, also, there's no country like North Korea that is like that similar as South Korea. We have lots of similarities as well as differences. And as you mentioned, it's very sad that even Koreans nowadays, or younger generations, are looking at North Korea just as enemies, not as our old friend who we fought very intensely, but still an old friend.
For me, one of the saddest videos I've ever watched is watching a North Korean and South Korean family reunite for the first time. I remember watching those videos and I just thought like it wasn't being a North Korean and being a South Korean being split across that line at the beginning, especially, it was nothing that big. It was really a matter of were you on the north side or the south side of the land at that time to be split like that. Families were literally just cut in half across the line. And I think, like you said, we have a lot of similarities. And because of this dictatorship in North Korea, it looks like we're two completely opposite countries. But the reality is, it's not very much like that. We've got a lot of similarities. And I think this is something that we need to remember when we want to think about reunification, is that there's not that much indifference when you put that kind of governmental structure aside. So this is a more personal question, but what are your personal views on reunification? Do you think it's important and do you think it's feasible?
I think even though reunification is a very difficult and complicated and a long-term thing we as Koreans need to face, I think we still need to look at that direction and we need to still set our plans. But as I mentioned, it's very, very sad that so many people are giving up on the idea of reunification. They just want to live as separate countries. But still, I understand that because reunification has its costs. We will have to like support North Koreans when we reunite. And that aside, reunification itself is hard because North Korea and South Korean government have two different ideological political views. So that itself is hard, and there are external forces existing. If Korea unites, China and Russia will feel pressured because our border will like face China and Russia, and they will feel intimidated. Like it's a very dangerous and unexpected things can happen. But still, I think we have to at least hope for reunification and like look at that direction and having that sense of idealism, I would say, is needed. But yeah, that's getting lost.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that reunification, it's a really tricky thing. One, you have one side of the border that's dictatorship, they're communist. The other side, you've got a democracy and very, very capitalist. Like that's South Korea is run on the capitalism. Samsung, Hyundai, all those big companies, just big capitalist giants. And reunification means coming up with something that works for both sides. But I personally believe that it's not even just like we should or we shouldn't. I personally think it's a duty and I think it's an obligation and something that as Koreans that we are one Korea and that our goal should always be how can we reunify and then think about yes there are some big practical issues but how are we going to overcome them? Because the goal should be reunification. And I think the fact that now in our generation in particular, that's lost, that many people like, actually, no, reunification is not the right way. It's not a goal. We should just be happy with what we're living in right now. I think that's a wrong mindset to have, especially when you realize that 26 million people on the other side of the border are suffering every single day, and they're not different to us. Like you said, they're not different in language. I mean, they have a different dialect, but the language is pretty much the same. They share a history, they share a culture, and they share an ethnicity. So I think reunification is something we need to continuously strive for. So in the past, reunification attempts have been made. So there's inter-Korean summits like Nam북 Cheongsanghaedam between North and South Korea. So what is there to gain from these interactions, but what are also the limitations of these kind of interactions between politicians?
Yeah, I agree very much what you said, because you said that we should focus on the how. How are we going to reunite? And that question is not even asked, because people are discussing the cost of reunification. And I want to mention this. Even if there are costs of reunification, we have to support North Korean economy if we reunite. The long-term benefit of unification is very, very huge. I can't even imagine how big Korea will be after reunification.
But yeah, I was wondering a bit more about the inter-Korean summits. So like the kind
Yeah,
of between politicians, yeah.
to answer that question,
Mhm.
the older the politicians or the presidents from the past attempted to resolve that conflict and talk with the North Korean government, and it sometimes worked. It sometimes worked, and it sometimes didn't work. But in recent years, the government is, I think, literally giving up.
Yeah.
They're not even trying to communicate with North Korea. And the public is also like, why do we need to support North Korea? Why are we even sending food, or why are we even sending money to North Korea? We're I'm hard to live. Why are we sending money to North Korea?
Right.
And it's very weird, because I understand that. I really understand it, because I know the struggles the younger generations face in Korea. But at the same time, as you mentioned, these people in North Korea are suffering, and not only in like reunification perspective, but also in human rights perspective. It's important to support them. As you mentioned, the bad ones are the Kim family, not the general public in North Korea. So yeah, in human rights aspect, we can't just see them die. And I think it's sad that, I think even if it didn't lead to reunification, the past trials of Korean government of trying to communicate and help North Korean is worth it, because at least we tried, and we looked towards that directions. And yeah, that sometimes North Koreans just, maybe the money we sent are not directed towards poor people, but it definitely had progress, and we tried. So I think that just mindset itself is lost now.
Yeah.
We've just given up. And it's weird, because even in the constitution of Korea, it says South Korea will look upon reunification, and we will try to reunify someday.
Yeah.
But I don't know, it's going the opposite.
So this is the final question then. So like we're repeating and we're talking about that youth in particular, so people our age, are losing the faith and the hope for reunification. Why specifically youth? Why specifically people our age are feeling this way? And what can be done to gain that optimism or support for reunification?
That's a good question.
Thank you.
When I was young,
Mhm.
I remember people used to talk about reunification in a much more hopeful light. And as I grew older, I think I'm kind of in this intersection of this conflicting opinions between reunification. When I was young, I remember everyone being positive about reunification.
Right.
And when I was in middle school, high school, suddenly people around me started to hate on the idea of reunification.
Mm.
So I think the reason behind that is individualism, because of the competitive nature. Younger generation, I think, usually don't have the don't have spare any extra space to think about greater issues and act upon them. Thinking about them is one thing, and acting upon them or stating their opinions to others is the other. So they don't have that leeway. They don't have that space, because as I mentioned, when I was in my first year, like if you're in the system and when you're constantly like working in with the system, you can't you can't you don't have any energy to like point out what's wrong or what we need to improve and how we should go get better. And I think many younger generation is feeling this way. And even not only reunification issues, but even climate change. I see people being like, I can't do anything about this. It's just, and reunification is seen as something rainbows and sunshines. It's not a thing that, yeah, it feels so far to everyone. And yeah, people are giving up.
Yeah, I do hope that the youth in particular, and I think this is why I continue doing this podcast, is in particular for youth to learn more about politics and youth to think deeper about the world and the kind of situations that we're living in. And I hope that, we do gain more optimism and we gain more support for the situation in North Korea and South Korea, and to hope that I really want to see reunification in my lifetime. Um,
Me too.
I mean, I hope I can live another 80 odd years, but in that time, I would love to see, one Korea and help North Korean economies, um, and help those people who have probably a lot of psychological trauma, and really growing a nation that, once again, is something that we're very proud of. So, thank you once again, Stephen, for joining in this episode and representing South Korea. This wraps up this episode of the Youth Factor. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope you look forward to the next stop of our journey, Greece. Thank you very much.